So considering that Prince's seminal album Purple Rain and the rest of his Warner Brothers discography has recently been added to Spotify's catalog, we wanted to take a moment to reflect on this incredibly influential artist's legacy, as well as the somewhat disputed decision to launch his music in digital formats, a decision that was made, of course, posthumously, since he was steadfast in his desire to keep his music off the internet. I was going to spend some time talking about how just wonderful and influential he has been, but that seems like something that everyone has said and will continue to say about the artist formerly known as Prince. So I will start instead with an anecdote. So last night I found myself sitting in a Texas Longhorn steakhouse in rural Ohio, which is an odd place for a mixed-race vegetarian to be at any time of the day, but particularly around 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. The reason is I wanted to get drinks with some friends after a theater performance, and all the other restaurants were occupied or closed because it's rural Ohio. So in the middle of our Moscow Mules in a heinously decorated Southwestern style restaurant full of taxidermied animals, my boyfriend paused the conversation and goes, "Hey, is that a country version of Purple Rain playing?" And lo and behold, there was a man with a twangly voice and a jangly guitar singing about how he wanted to see his girl standing underneath the purple rain. At first, I was kind of mad because I'm like, why would anybody order a country version of Purple Rain? And then I kept listening, and I was less mad, and then I was conflicted. Because why would anybody order or enjoy a country version of Purple Rain? In fact, why would I enjoy a country version of Purple Rain? I don't know. But I think this speaks to Prince's quality of creating music that was both emotive and adaptable. I won't pretend that he was the greatest lyricist of all times, because let's be real, he wasn't. However, it's his power, his energy, and his often surprising sexuality and sexual energy in his songs that both surprised and captivated his audiences from the time of his early releases up until now. And that's what makes him an important artist of our time. So, with that, let us discuss the posthumous release of Purple Rain onto Spotify.
Well, I'm going to hit you with an anecdote of my own.
Oh, I can't wait.
One that is far less interesting, but explains perhaps my experience with Purple Rain, which is actually fairly minimal, surprisingly. When I was in year 8, year 9, I don't know, I was in high school. And I had a part-time job, so I was earning money. And while other kids were saving for a car, I was funneling my $50 a week into expanding my CD collection.
That's so sweet.
And as you sort of go through sort of the early period of sort of early high school, you inevitably go back to the classics of the 70s and the 80s and, you know, listen to Zeppelin, listen to Sabbath, listen to all these sort of things that were really fundamental in music and the idea of how these genres that we now take for granted worked. These sort of formative artists, Pink Floyd, that sort of thing. And I remember one week, because I'd only ever buy things when they were on sale, so they had to be $10 or less, basically. And JB Hi-Fi had just come to my town, and it was fucking brilliant because I wasn't paying $30 at whatever the fucking expensive stores were. Mm-hmm. And I remember distinctively sitting there knowing I had to buy, you know, one of these albums, and I was looking at Purple Rain and David Bowie's Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars.
Oh, man.
And it was one of those things where I can only buy one of these albums. And which one is it going to be? I only had enough money for one androgynous sex alien in my collection that week. And I didn't know which one to buy. I was conflicted. And I eventually went with Bowie. I got Ziggy Stardust, Spiders from Mars, which, you know, to the credit of that album, I was listening to it when I went back to Australia for Christmas.
I'm not sure you could have gone wrong with either of those decisions, to be fair.
No, you can't go wrong with either of those decisions, but it was opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Total opportunity cost. And then the next week, or the week after, whenever I got paid, because I think I got paid every sort of 2 weeks or something, when I went back, Purple Rain had gone back up to being sort of $20, $30.
Oh my gosh.
So I naturally went with the next $10 record that I could find. And Purple Rain never went back down in cost during that period. And then as time went on, I just kind of lost sight of it. And it just kind of got to the point where I just never ended up owning a Prince album. So my experience with Prince was actually very minimal. Obviously, I read a lot about him and I was always aware of where he sort of existed, but I had never heard Purple Rain until we decided to have a listen to it for the purposes of speaking about it today. And the weird thing was, listening to Purple Rain now, is how familiar it felt all the way through. It felt like I had heard this album before. I felt very familiar with what was going on, and yet I could instantly pick up how original it was, how it was very clearly one of the most distilled examples of this sound, which was just a really fascinating experience to go through, to be able to reflect on this critically for the purposes of talking to you about it today. So,
well, yeah, I'm very glad that I could share your semi-first experience with Prince. Can we call it semi-first? Because I do think that it's sort of,
yeah.
I think it's sort of impossible to escape his music in a great way, or to escape his image, because let's be real, when he came out, he was always in conflict with himself. You know, he became a sex symbol by wearing these purple ruffled costumes and these androgynous get-ups, always playing with gender, always defying racial constructs. Also, he was like 5 feet tall. And yet, he was so beloved. It's interesting that you were forced to choose between Bowie and Prince, two artists who have always been presented hand in hand for very good reason. And for me, I think in this choose your own adventure story that you and I have musically embarked on, I was handed the Prince album instead of the David Bowie album, which is funny because my mom, God, I think I was probably in elementary school the first time she made me watch Purple Rain and said, "Now, Aviva, this is not a good movie, but it's an important movie because it's Prince." And that was the end of the conversation. That was it. That was it. Nothing else. And it's so funny, I always had these friends whose parents were deeply in love with him. My childhood best friend, her mother, was obsessed with Prince. Their whole house was purple. Her license plate was love sign. My high school boyfriend's mom used to follow Prince around the country and knew him personally. And it's so interesting to me that all these women who, all these mothers of my friends, of my boyfriends, my partners and stuff, were obsessed with him, including my own mother. To a point where I remember the day that both Prince and Bowie passed away, separate days. And I remember when David Bowie passed away, my mom was crying because she was like, he was such a symbol for me. He taught me about gender, and he taught me about personal identity, and she was heartbroken. But I also remember waking up to go to work the day that Prince died, and I remember reading the notification on my phone, and I remember sort of yelling, "Mom!" and running into her bedroom, and she was sitting on her bed, silent. Just no words. And she just looked at me and just shook her head. Because both of us, obviously he was quite young, only I think 53 when he passed away. That aside, doesn't matter how old he was or would have been. He could have been 83. The disbelief that the world could keep turning without Prince's dramatically arching eyebrows and, I would say, deferent yet masterful commandment of the stage. When you watch him perform, he gets on stage like, this is nothing. This is nothing. Yet, the raw emotive power that he communicates is so striking. I sent a friend of mine his Super Bowl performance from 2007, where he performs on top of a stage shaped like a giant guitar, and it starts raining during his performance. And in a Super Bowl reflective documentary that I watched on the internet, these sound engineers were talking about how they spoke to Prince and said, "Hey, it's supposed to rain. Please don't get on stage because you could get electrocuted." And he's just like, "I'm getting on stage." And what you have is Prince, this petite man in ruffled blouses, playing in the pouring rain, leaning into his guitar on America's biggest stage, which is the Super Bowl halftime show. And it's like, I was rendered just speechless, because how could anybody command such power with such intention and articulacy, I think that we had an artist who never did anything accidentally. Everything he did was intentional and meaningful and full of his personality, and I think that's so special. And I don't know if people come around like that often. I think we were extremely lucky to have him around, even if he did produce shitty movies like Purple Rain and then Cherry Moon.
I mean, they're shitty, but they're also remarkably cohesive.
Yeah.
There's no outside influence there, which I think is the brilliant thing about Prince. He always had a lot of say over what could or couldn't be done with the music. And that feeds into using this music for specific purposes, which speaks to the overall sort of artistic cohesiveness. So yeah, you get those endearing spots where maybe something is really cheesy or maybe something is really cognitively really shit, but is incredibly enjoyable because you're seeing this maximized creative potential from this person who has a vision or a particular idea of what they want to achieve. And, I think the definition of good art is when you have an idea of what you want to do and then it gets achieved to the most intentional way of producing that vision, the clarity of creative vision made manifest. Ultimately, I suffered with Prince's views on what his music could or couldn't be used for or where it would be made available. I think one of the main reasons why it's been so long since I've really encountered Prince is just the lack of availability of his music outside of purchasing the record. And I think, throughout the 90s and early 2000s, that was probably a completely valid view to have. But certainly with the advent of streaming services and the nature of the industry changing and the way of consuming music changing, it's made it very difficult for me to encounter his music or even just kind of understand his music.
I agree. It's a shame that it took so long, and it's a shame that it took him to pass away in order for it to happen, because then it feels, at least to me, a little bit inappropriate that it's now on streaming services. I'm not upset about it because I love starting my mornings with the album Purple Rain. It's a great way. It's a great album to listen to. It takes you through an incredibly coherent range of emotions, ending with, the titular song Purple Rain, which is a powerhouse.
I disagree with you on that because I think that while Prince was alive and he didn't want things to be streamable, that's completely understandable. You're alive, you're still, in charge of this catalog in terms of a financial money-making thing. And, it's a matter of record that Spotify screws artists.
Yeah.
All these streaming services do not service the artist. So I think that is a completely valid thing to do. If you're a living artist and you want to control your thing, I believe that. I think when an artist passes, a lot of concerns about their catalog stop mattering. I think that when they pass and there's no longer, when the money then just flows to the estate, I think that it's fair to be a little bit looser with experiencing it.
Yeah.
Because I think at this stage, Prince the artist, he's not negatively affected by this. If anything, it just means that more people can listen to the reason why he was great. And I think posthumously, that's actually kind of a nice thing. Whereas, when he was alive, I completely understand not wanting to make your music available via streaming services.
No, I definitely don't disagree with you. I guess I'm just articulating this sort of weird dissonance that I feel emotionally with, I know it was against his wishes, so it feels strange. It feels strange because I know it's not what he wanted. I firmly believe that an artist has to adapt in order to survive, especially in this increasingly mediatized world. And, we've had a series of iconic celebrities pass away within 10 years. Not necessarily starting, but I will start with the passing of Michael Jackson. And when Michael Jackson passed away, I remember the world stopped, but then the world streamed his music. And the movie This Is It came out, and it was this almost mourning rite, I think, for fans. I went to theaters and saw it with my friends, and people were in their seats dancing to Michael Jackson. And I think that it gave, younger generations, myself included, an opportunity to experience his music and grow up with his music that I think a lot of people were not afforded with the withholding of Prince's catalog. And I'm hoping that people will catch on and start listening to him again, because I completely agree with you that yes, it's time to put it on the internet. It's time to give people the opportunity to get to know him. And unfortunately, it couldn't happen while he was alive. I am glad that his music is available in digital formats. I am. But, it is a little bit of a strange feeling just knowing that he was diametrically opposed to it.
I think when it's shaped, and this is the experience for a lot of music that was made in the 70s and the 80s, is that this music was designed to be listened to on the format that it has, especially for things that were envisioned to only exist on vinyl when they were created, because nothing else existed. I think that there's a very real way that the format feeds into experiencing the music. And I think that that's certainly on several other albums, maybe not so much on Purple Rain, because Purple Rain is very much song orientated. But certain other aspects of Prince's catalogue, the format is a very important concern. So there is an element of not listening to it optimally. But I think that at the same time, the strengths outweigh the concerns on that matter. But
because let's be real, Purple Rain, it's the kind of album that you can, I mean, and it helps that it was filmed, of course, and created for a film, but it's the kind of album that you can envelop yourself in. You know, it's the kind of album that if I don't have headphones in, I want it on my speaker system and I want it loud so that its sound is inescapable. Because I think that's how it should be listened to, inescapably.
Well, I remember I was reading a reflection and a review on it earlier today, and the quote that they used was that Prince didn't write albums, Prince wrote environments.
Yes, that's a brilliant way of summarizing.
And that's absolutely how Purple Rain functions